Welcome to the Balance Sheet, where we rise above the noise and learn about the most critical business issues of our age. I'm your host and fellow student, Conrad Choi. We've all been looking at the issues about climate change, decarbonization, and moving into clean energy. And today we have a guest who knows. We have Andrew Hume, who is the managing director of Thor Energy. It's a company based in Perth. That's Perth, Western Australia, not Perth in Scotland. But its main sort of business is looking for natural hydrogen and helium. We're really privileged and lucky to have Andrew here today with us, because it's a bit of a return to Cambridge for Andrew, because he did his executive MBA here in Cambridge. Now, for those of you who are watching this live, if you have any questions about the energy sector, about careers in energy, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll take them as we go. So Andrew, first of all, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. The pleasure literally is all mine. It's great to be back in Judge, so thank you.
Yeah. So Andrew, you've worked, more than 25 years in the energy sector, from oil and gas, and then now very much in hydrogen and helium. And for people who don't have that same track record in energy, what is one of those big misconceptions that people have about decarbonization and the transition towards clean energy?
I think there's many, to be honest with you. I think, first of all, it's probably worth just reflecting on where we are today in terms of energy transition. I mean, the World Economic Forum basically, last year announced that the rate of progress, the rate of development towards net zero was at its fastest pace ever. That something like 2/3 of the countries on the planet had improved this index they have of showing in terms of a score point of view how fast they're progressing. So ostensibly, a lot of progress. I think about $2 trillion of investment in renewable energy last year. From about 2 or 3 years ago, we passed the mark where more than half of the people involved in the whole of the energy sector worldwide are now in that renewable energy side of things. So a lot of positivity, a lot of developments in the technology. Solar's come down in price dramatically, as has wind, as has a lot of other elements. So a lot of good news, but tempered with a realization that that's still really not good enough. We still produce about 81% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. 81%. So it's a vast amount. Whilst we're expending $2 trillion a year, most of that money is going into developed countries, mostly China, to be honest with you, at a proportion. Oh, okay. Most of that 90% in developed countries. But about 80%, I've seen a few numbers on this, but I think 80% is a good number to use. 80% of the growth in demand for energy on a global basis is in developing countries. So there's a huge imbalance on where we're investing the money and where it's having an impact, both on the climate, because the alternative of not investing in green energy in those countries is you bring more coal and more natural gas and oil into the system. But I think it also has a social aspect to that as well, because what you're doing is you're basically forcing developing countries to use poor quality energy sources that have greater environmental impact. And when you invest in any kind of energy solution, you're not investing for 1 year. You don't build something and then you change your mind next year and convert it to a green system. That energy, those complexes, those structures you're building, those factories and refineries and things, they're 20, 30, 40, 50-year projects. And so now would be ideally the time to invest in the developing countries, but that's not happening. Yeah. So I think we're in a very interesting time where, whilst there's a lot of good things about the energy transition, it's really not working out the way we want. Yeah. And I think just my other answer to your question about what do we not realize about the energy system is, I think all of us, hand on heart, would love to say just stop oil and let's move on and be ultra green from tomorrow. I think everyone can say that. But the truth is that's just not, it's not practical. So in order to take our energy systems throughout and actually convert them into a fully renewable system, it is multi-decade projects, and we're stuck with hydrocarbons for the long term, and things like plastics and other uses of hydrocarbons are not going to change overnight, unfortunately.
I remember reading quite recently, and it shocked me just when because as you mentioned, China is investing tremendous amounts in wind, solar, nuclear as well. But they're also investing a lot in coal, and India as well. And they just find that their energy demand is growing so much faster than renewables can provide. And over here in developed nations, again, it's a similar story in that data centers, all these data centers that's needed to train those AI models use up a huge amount of energy. So do you think that we'd be able to match that kind of demand and supply over time? Is that gap going to force us to actually extend the runway for reliance on fossil fuels?
I mean, I think you've answered your own question. I think logically, yeah, unfortunately, that's the answer. The cost is coming down, but there's a lot of competition for goods, for solar, for wind, a lot of competition on people as well, having the right skill sets there as well, in parts of the system as well. And I think the economics are just not really working out. But I think also the other side of things is that's the practicality of it, but there's a desirability as well. I think 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, there was such an inertia behind the green transition. Politicians around the planet are getting behind it. People, societies getting behind it. And I think the world has changed, as we can all imagine, especially over the last 6 months or so, but over a longer period, in truth, where that greener ambition is less reflected in global policies. And I think it's potentially less reflected in some societal outlooks on the desire to move to a greener future. And all that acts as a brake, I think, on the ability for people to invest, for countries to invest, less social license requirements on a company. So I think all of this stuff has potentially unwound a little bit of the inertia on the green transition. Maybe not significantly, but it's just a break. It's just something else that slows things down.
Well, one of those magic bullets in terms of getting us to a cleaner energy future was supposed to be hydrogen. And I remember how much promise a couple of years ago, people were investing and things like that. How has the investor sentiment been with hydrogen now that it's a couple of years down the hike?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting. I think one of the first things to think about in terms of hydrogen is, well, a couple of things, I suppose. First of all of the hydrogen that we use today, all a fraction of a percentage, is manufactured. You take mostly, I think about 76% is natural gas, 20-something% is coal, a little bit of oil. And the green hydrogen, which everyone gets excited about, has really been the heart and soul of the hype of the last few years, is at best 1%, something like that, 1, maybe 2%. What we do, so most of it is, but all those processes are essentially a manufacturing process. The gas basically go through these reformation reactions to produce hydrogen. It's highly energetic. You require a lot of energy, a lot of heat into the system, both to heat things up, but also miraculously to cool it as well. So you get heat exchanges in different parts of the process that are exothermic and endothermic. It's more complex than I understand, to be truthful. So very, very complex systems. They're very energy intensive. They also produce a lot of carbon dioxide. Now, in a small number of these places, we're sequestering that carbon dioxide, but really it's a tiny amount. So same with coal, similar processes, and even green hydrogen. You're basically taking, it's green because you're using solar or wind or some other kind of renewable energy, and essentially, in basic terms, electrolyzing water to make hydrogen and oxygen. But it's not a very efficient system at all, and it's far from green because the whole process is inefficient, and obviously you have to make your turbines and your solar cells and et cetera to begin with. So that's where we're at. So we're basically, when it talks about hydrogen, it's not an energy source in the way we think oil and gas is or renewables are. It's actually, we use it as a vector. We're using it basically as a store of energy transfer around the place. Now, hydrogen could be used in two kind of groups of uses, if you like, for energy, which is actually a very small amount now, but mostly it's used as a feedstock for chemical processes. So we use it in the refining of oil and gas. There's a lot of sulfur in oil, and basically hydrogen can help the process basically strips out the sulfur, produces a cleaner, crude oil that then can be fractionated and all cracked and all the other things they do to. So a lot of hydrogen is used for that. Obviously, the world relies on farming, and farming uses lots of fertilizers. And underpinning all fertilizers or most fertilizers is ammonia. When you make ammonia by basic nitrogen and hydrogen.
I remember it's three atom NH3.
That's right. Exactly. Wow. So there's processes like that, and methanol that goes into fuels and whatever. So most hydrogen is used in that process. And so when we talk about hydrogen and the hype around hydrogen and the global hydrogen economy, which was what was on the front of every newspaper 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, this was an idea which I think will eventuate, but it's just not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. It is where we're actually relying on hydrogen as a vector. We use it for transportation. For ships, cars, buses, you name it, maybe as a chemical battery, if we like, to store chemical energy, so that when we can burn that to produce electricity anytime we want, or put it into fuel cells. But that really hasn't eventuated, and I think largely because the hype and the perceived scaling of that whole system was based on green hydrogen. So there's all these different colors for hydrogen. So they have it like, brown relates to coal and gray relates to gas. There's a color for nuclear and so on and so forth. And green was ascribing that renewable energy to the whole system. So the green is what we're focused on. And basically 2 or 3 years ago, you'll all remember just reading article after article, scheme idea that was going to happen in Australia and Britain and Europe and all over the planet. And I think less than 1% of those have moved beyond conceptualization stages. And I live in Australia, as you mentioned, and it feels very common. Every week or so, we see another one of these big mega projects that had so much hype a few years ago, just being cancelled or put onto like indefinite FID postponement. I think of the Central Queensland Hydrogen project, which was like $10 or $12 billion project. Is essentially mothballed. So that's what's happened. We've seen a lot of the energy come out of it. And I think the more these projects that are cancelled, the more investors, or less likely investors are to put money into that scheme. So I think we're at a bit of a, we're in that valley of death in the realization.
The trough of disappointment.
There we go. And see, I've forgotten everything since my MBA. Yeah. So we're somewhere in there. And so I think it's not terminal. There's still fundamental value in green hydrogen, but its cost is too expensive. It's 2 or 3x the cost of producing the hydrogen from natural gas, for instance. So we need to get out of that. And then, it's where obviously the stuff I'm doing, the natural hydrogen, comes in as a different way of getting hydrogen.
So we actually have a question from an Aussie.
Oh, cool.
Based in Sydney, who's interested in your take on the regression in the environmental focus and spending in the US. Do you think the momentum has shifted? And for those who are interested, remember, just put your questions in the Q&A box.
I'm but a humble geologist, but I'll try my best at answering that one. I think the answer to that clearly is yes. The momentum's come right out of it. I was at this conference yesterday. I think you mentioned it earlier, down in London at the Geological Society, which was really good. It was just focused on natural hydrogen. We had a lot of people actually over from the States. I spoke to a guy from the United States Geological Survey, they've done amazing work there actually, but find that. And they were getting asked questions. How do you move forward? How are we going to take that project you've worked on and take it to the next step? And he put his hands up and basically said, I'm not sure we really can, because our team has shrunk so much over the last year, over the last 6 months, basically, and we don't feel confident that we're going to be able to maintain potentially the whole team that's working on natural hydrogen, or at least all of what they need. So I think in the States in particular, there's one example, but I hear similar stories from industry. There's a lot of money being pulled out of the greener side of things, and more and more going into oil and gas. Now, natural hydrogen is somehow seems to be quite resilient. There's still quite a lot of investment going into natural hydrogen in the US, which is good. It's good for me. That's my game. But I think that's America, and maybe that's ground zero. But I think, this whole expression of what do they say, when America sneezes, the world gets a cold. And I think it's such an influential country. And it's not just about America, but let's face it, it is incredibly important. And I think the rest of the world is taking a pause and thinking, whether consciously or subconsciously, when you're investing in green energies, it's generally an expenditure it's more costly than just investing in conventional energies, if you like. And so does that put your country at a disadvantage? Basic economics, I think, whether that, as I say, the conscious or subconscious thoughts. And I can't fail but think that that's affecting policy to some extent. I think it's definitely in companies, influencing company decisions. Australia, the person that asked the question, you'll know this. You'll have read in the papers over recent weeks how Andrew Forrester of Fortescue, for instance, has pulled the pin on I don't know, 3 or 4 green hydrogen projects that he'd got out there and stood up in front of the UN and all kinds of forums saying how wonderful these were, and basically he's pulled back and he's slightly pivoted, and a lot of companies have done the same thing, and so I think that the obvious sense is yes, it has had an impact. Some of it's the Trumpian aspect. Some of it, I think, might be a certain cynicism or a tiredness of this, of us always talking about energy transition, always talking about net zero and GHG and things like that. And I just wonder if people can become a bit jaded by it as well. But I definitely sense in the short term, things are retarded. My hope is that retardation is a temporal effect. And I don't know when that is, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's in 3 or 4 years' time, but I think that we're on this march, towards the green transition. There's nothing that's going to stop that. I would see, it's just a case of when do we get there. And so I think hopefully we're going through a slow period, and things will start to accelerate. Economics might help that. Technology might help that as well. But I'm no expert, so that'd be my answer.
I remember visiting Texas a few 1-2 years ago, and when I came back, people were asking, why did I go? And they couldn't believe, these are people here in the UK, when I said actually Texas is the largest state in the US when it comes to renewables, just as it is with, has more renewable capacity than California. And a lot of it was because of the Biden's IRA, Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
And it was red states that seem to have taken up more of it than the Democratic states. A lot of it was down to a more looser regulation, so they could get off the ground for planning.
Yeah.
My question to you is, obviously, there's the economics, and you need, whether it's tax credits, subsidies, incentives, but are there policies that you hope governments should look at to push people to, whether it's planning, whether it's adoption?
Yeah. 100%. I think there's different levels of that. So, we'll keep the Australian theme going a little bit longer. Why not? We've got someone in the audience, so and that's where I now call home. So, and where we do business. But so Australia is a federation of states, and each of those states, there's federal policy, but each of those states have their own policies, and they have control, especially onshore of their acreage, whether it be for mining or oil and gas or now hydrogen, helium. And there's a huge discrepancy between how advanced those states and territories are in terms of getting the policies in place to allow a company like Thor to come along and be willing to invest money over a long period of time to try and hunt for natural hydrogen and helium. Same for renewables as well. So for me, from a hydrogen point of view, but it's equally true for renewables, South Australia has really pushed hard to get legislation in place. So kudos. And so they're not paying us, they're not incentivizing us monetarily, but they're enabling an environment where you feel safe, that you can invest, and you've got a line of sight to eventually producing and hopefully making some money for your shareholders. And so states that are not quite doing that as efficiently are looked on less favorably, because there's a longer time period. And I think that's what you've almost described in the States, because in the States there's the IRA, but there is local policies in different states, different taxation rates even, that would potentially indicate why you should go to one place or another. So I think there's that. Countries worldwide need to start doing this thing. They need to start doing things more simplistically as well. I don't want to have a go at the UK because in many regards, it's saving. It's kind of leading the charge in many ways. But the way that the bureaucratic aspects of how we manage offshore licenses is really complex. I've spent the last 2 or 3 years with Total in Aberdeen, just trying to get a project going, and it's been very difficult. Everyone tries really hard, but each of these departments that are somewhat siloed and have slightly different metrics, it's very difficult for them to come together and actually form an environment which is good to do business.
Okay. We have another question from the audience, which is, Andrew, do you think we need a breakthrough technology to achieve net zero?
Do I think? I don't think we need one. Would it help? Absolutely. I honestly think, and this is just it's not just my thoughts, but it's what I think is, we're going to get there. But it might not be 2050. I think we need to be practical. It's going to be, I don't know, I have no idea what it is. Name your name, 2060, 2070, 2100, I don't know. So we'll get there, we will, because the economics actually aren't that bad for renewables. They're getting better. We're solving a lot of the problems. Some of the problems of intermittency, for instance, when the wind ain't blowing, the turbines don't spin, when the sun doesn't shine. And so a lot of that, we're starting to, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And that might be where the real breakthrough technology that perhaps you allude to might actually be the key part. How do you store that energy efficiently so you don't have losses, or not many losses? How do you store that energy for when the sun's shining in the day so you can use it at nighttime, or when the kids come home from school and that's when everyone's got their ovens and TVs on, things like that. So how do you do that? And I think that speaks to things like grid balancing and all the problems we have with the national grids that were really never designed for huge loads of energy during the daytime or when the wind's blowing. And this on and off situation just wasn't conceived 30, 50, 100 years ago. So I think that's breakthroughs in technology will come there, and there's a lot of investment. There's a lot of battery companies, other people looking at mechanical ways of storing energy, chemical ways of storing energy. I think it will come. And then I think there's other potential breakthroughs in other sectors. We hear a lot of hype about the nuclear story at the moment. And I think nuclear needs to be a big part of actually the future policy of most countries. I know it used to be, the devil's work, but I think everyone's realizing that actually we can do it safely now. It is actually a mature and adult, grown-up way of harvesting energy. And I think breakthroughs, the whole thorium technology, the liquid salt sort of approaches as well. Technology that's kind of quite old actually is being revamped and it's starting to look to be more attractive. And then I work in natural hydrogen, so my industry basically doesn't really exist, if you like. It's very new area. So it's a bit like oil and gas in a way, in the fact that we're trying to get hydrogen that the Earth produces naturally. So what happens? We were having a chat about this earlier. There's a bunch of different ways that the rocks and soils and things can produce hydrogen. But the biggest two are something called a process called what they call serpentinization, which is get ultramafic rocks. So rocks that are normally formed at mid-oceanic ridges, and they're associated with mantle and deep rocks, gabbros and peridotites and things like that. And they've got a mineral in them, a bunch of minerals, but one of the key minerals is olivine, and it's kind of green, olive-colored mineral. And basically, under the right temperature and pressure conditions, it's really temperature, not so much pressure actually, the right temperature conditions, if you pass water across these minerals, they change their chemical nature, and they turn into a bunch of minerals, which is called serpentine, and the process of serpentinization. And as a byproduct, it releases hydrogen. So that hydrogen in various places in the planet where you have these rocks at the right area in the right abundance produce hydrogen. And you can also do it by areas where there's natural radiation can break down water to produce hydrogen as well. So we are looking in areas like that in various parts of the planet. South Australia is where we look at one of the most promising areas. There's a lot of activity in Central North America and a few other places around the planet, Europe too, in France and southern France, northern Spain. And so this is a technology which, I think the USGS said something like there's, what is it? I forget the number, 5.6 trillion tons of hydrogen that's potentially in the earth that we can use in the crust. And if we could just extract 2% of that, that would be enough to reach net zero for 200 years. It's phenomenal numbers. Now, you have to take all these with a pinch of salt because it's all built on some models and some hugely ambivalent input parameters. But it definitely gives a sense that there is a prize that we could be liberated. But we've got a lot of ground to cover on that. We've got to understand, does this work? Where does it work? What are the economics? What are the production rates? Do we need to do some kind of stimulation, or is the natural system going to work? So there's all of these. I don't think necessarily one technology is going to be the silver bullet, but there's a lot of work in different aspects. I think collectively we might get there.
Yeah. So Andrew, you're a geologist.
I am,
right?
Yeah.
So you came through the technical side of oil and gas, then you went into the commercial, and now you're in a leadership position. At what point did you think, you're going to make that transition from technical to more managerial? And at what point did you think it's time to do an executive MBA?
Well, I actually did I did it twice, I suppose. But my first job, I worked for a company that's now part of Thales, the French defense company. But I worked for an English company that did offshore surveys. So we go on boats out onto the ocean and acquire seismic data, which tells you about the rock 2, 3, 4 kilometers below the seabed. And we'd also do things from an environmental point of view, looking at mapping the seabed, looking for ecological communities down there. Look at foundation designs and things for fiber optic cables or offshore infrastructure and things like that. So I did that for a couple of years, very technical, offshore, and then I was lucky enough to end up in headquarters, actually not far from here in London, and then from there to Houston, and kept getting promoted into management positions. And very quickly, I was out of the technical arena, and I was managing vessel fleets and profit and loss and lots of marketing and stuff like that. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I did a lot of business with Shell, who were a client of ours, and they basically said, "Come and join us." So I joined Shell, back to a really specialized technical role where we were trying to solve a drilling issue where they basically had these things called shallow water flows, where you drill into the sediment and you get a blowout of overpressured water in the shallow subsurface. Potentially very dangerous, but also environmentally really unsound. So we needed to figure that thing out. And we did. I was part of a really clever team. I don't think I added much at all, but we kind of figured that problem out. And then from there, I continued in the technical realm looking for oil and gas exploration. Did that for a few more years, and then eventually got back into the management and business development, initially asset management. And then I moved from Australia. I was in Australia from 06 to 16, and I moved to Denmark in 16 to work for Maersk, AP Møller Group. And at that point, I was in the team lead kind of role, looking after business development in Africa for exploration and appraisal. And I did those sort of roles for a couple of years. And then I decided to do my MBA, and I started it in 2020, which was the COVID year. We've all got our own memories about that year. And I was sitting there in Denmark, and I'd bemoaning my lot to my poor suffering wife, just say, I wish I'd been considering doing my MBA for a few years and just not got around to do it. My daughter was born and kind of put things on hold. And I think I almost lost sight of doing it. And then I said, I wish I'd done it. She said, well, just go and get after it. So I got my old spreadsheet out. And Khaled had visited us in Copenhagen a couple of years ago. I got my spreadsheet out, and I saw the top of my list was Cambridge, was still Cambridge. And they were literally the first email I sent out. I think it was Khaled, I guess. And next thing I know, I was, they were like, well, the deadline for submission is 10 days away or something like that. So I frantically got my references, wrote my essays. Oh, you guys have all done this, I guess. You know what I'm talking about. Frantically staying up all night trying to come up with something that I think might be interesting. Who should we have as a guest lecturer and things like that. So and decided to do the MBA that way. But fundamental to that was, why did I want to do it in the first place? And I think it was several things. I guess I'd amassed a lot of experience, technical, commercial, managerial, leadership, all these words. But all of them had been done organically within big companies, massive companies. I worked for Shell and Total and Maersk, 100,000 kind of size companies, employees, massive companies. And I guess I didn't know was I just learning things that were so specific to the oil and gas industry, so specific to big companies like that? And how does that really relate to the rest of the world, to different industries and things like that? And then also for me, I'd really started to embark on this journey of having spent 20 odd years finding lots of oil and gas or being involved in that, starting to wake up to, is this really what we should be doing to the planet? Does this feel good to me? Is this what I want to kind of, is this how I want to spend my years? So I suppose I had a change of mindset over that time, gradually. And I realized I wanted to make a change. And I realized that I wanted to make a change probably within a smaller company at a higher position, where potentially, hopefully, if it's a good influence, I can make more of an impact. But I wanted to get the validity of coming to do the MBA, see how I performed in it, see how much I knew, how much I needed to learn, whether I was cut out for this sort of thing, but also to learn from people from other industries as well. Find out, how did they do it in banking? How do they do it in, or whatever it might be, pharmaceuticals? There's quite a few pharma guys on our course, and you learn a lot. And you guys are going through that now. And for me, maybe I didn't realize that. I think it was some of my motivation, but afterwards I realized how important. Probably the biggest thing I got out of it was learning from the professors, from the doctors, learning the theory, taking what I'd learned organically and putting it into a better context. But also really realizing how do people do it differently and maybe better. Maybe differently is the better word, because collectively, if you can smash everyone's different ways of doing things, you'll end up with an answer that's probably the optimal. And that's what I, in retrospect, that's probably what I got the most out of it. And then, how's that? I guess ultimately that's led me to where I am. So I stayed in Total for about a year after graduation. And then we made the decision. Total's a great company, really great company. But we made the decision it was time to return to Australia there. And it was the time to say, I need to sort of make the most of my MBA and kind of fulfill my own sort of aspirations. And that's ultimately what led me to this position.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience who's obviously interested in what you are doing at Thor. I'll reframe the question a bit. So this is someone who's very interested in social impact, environmental consulting. What would be, with someone with that kind of background, what would be the inroad or some suggestions for that person to work with a company like Thor, or whether on an internship or a project? What would the angle be?
Yeah. Great question, I suppose. There's different aspects to it, in truth. So first of all, Thor's quite a small company, so we outsource most of our work when it comes to the environmental, social, legislative kind of side of things. That doesn't mean that we're not involved, but we really rely on the expertise of companies and individuals that are set up to do that. We use companies such as ERM and RPS and AMETS. And I meant to say something like other companies are available. I don't know. Companies like that are really specialized in providing services like this. And I think the first answer I would give is have a look at those companies, because you can very quickly get involved with working with people that really know the ins and outs, know the complexity, are going to be hired by companies to work on really interesting projects, and perhaps a lot of projects as well. When you go and work in a big operator, you might see 1 or 2 projects a year or something, but often when you work in a contractor, you might be involved in more. So that would be a good approach to do it. Obviously, the bigger companies, the Shells and the Totals and people like that, they do have in-house experts as well. So there's that approach, and I'd imagine internships and things are definitely possible. You just have to get out there and be bullish and knock on doors and not be frightened of rejection, because you'll get lots of knockbacks, but someone's bound to bite. And then I think companies like Thor, it's a case of, again, it's been in the right place at the right time. Do we have a project ongoing which we think you could find a space for you in to help? We do a lot of things in Australia at the moment, which is, they call it the native title process. It's basically a legislation that was put in place in Australia. It's a bit like the First Nations in Canada. It's very different, but kind of, close enough at the same time, where it basically means that certain Indigenous groups over certain agreed on areas have a right to take sort of a percentage of future profits and things like that. But to get to that process of being finally awarded licenses, you have to go through this native title negotiation process. Quite complex, involves a lot of interaction with local groups in towns and townships and tribal groups. There's lots of lawyers involved, of course, and it can take a lot of time. And similarly, we have to get other environmental approvals in place before we can do activities, and that involves a lot of community engagement. And so all of these projects, I think, would be, would work well with what your aspirations are, I think. It's just about knocking on lots of doors, sending your resumes out there, finding contacts that you know who are going to get you into the doors. It's the same story with any job, I think, or any internship. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned you worked in places like Shell, AP Moller, and I know that these are companies who had these rather large graduate schemes to try to attract top students at the undergraduate level. Didn't really care too much about their background and then worked on the job. Do you think that now, at this point in time, there's still avenues for people who don't have the technical experience of working in oil and gas or energy to join energy companies like that?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think to me, there's two questions in there. The first one relates to the graduate programs. They used to be huge. I wasn't quite part of one, but a lot of my peers in Shell came in through the graduate system. I joined I'd done 4 or 5 years before I joined Shell. So it was huge, and it was an amazing process. And I got some of it. You get a lot of training, and you get flown around the world for training. It's really nice. And all the other oil and gas companies did it. I think they all still do it, but I don't think it's necessarily as big as it used to be. I can't hand on heart. I'm not across it, but I sense that all of those kind of graduate programs have got a bit smaller in terms of intake. Perhaps that's a function of competition, but it's probably really cost control. But they're definitely out there, and I'd have to look it up. But you guys could do this instead. I'm sure Shell and all these big companies still do that, and it's about getting your name onto the list. They probably come to Cambridge. They probably have come on the road show. So find out if they're coming and speak to them. And reach out to other people. Find contacts in those companies in your LinkedIn networks, through your cohort, through the profs. They probably know someone that can at least get you somewhat into a foot into the door, and that's the way to do it. So that's the first part of the question, I think. And then your second part of the question, mine was,
if you don't have a technical background, is there still ways to get into energy companies, say mid-career?
Yeah, I think there is, because it depends what your aspirations are in terms of what you want to do in that company. But it's not just technical, right? I used to, I came from a technical background, so we think we're the best things in sliced bread. Geologists, we're the best. It's a load of rubbish, really. That's not really. No, whether it's technical, so geological or engineering and other things like that, that's only one aspect. None of these projects fly if you can't finance them. Finance kills more projects than any geological or any engineering challenge. Lack of finance is the big thing. So if you're adept at finding finance or attracting people in, and that's not just having a financial background, banking or whatever, investment, it's as much about how good you are as a communicator and a marketeer to bring those investors on board, especially in the smaller companies as well. I think it's the bigger projects that's maybe not quite as true, but there's I think in the small cap world especially, there's about creating camaraderie and shared vision about what are you trying to achieve and to get for people to align with what you want to do. So there's all of those skills that are certainly not technical. I mean, technical in the literal sense of the word. And then lawyers and project management. Project management qualifications are great in every sector, but especially in oil and gas, when you're doing these and renewables, where you're doing these massive multi-billion-dollar projects, you've really got to be on the button in project management and logistics. So I think there's room for people from almost any background.
Yeah, and I'm just reminded in a way that when you mentioned talent and how actually it's really important as we think about that clean energy transition, that talent, not all the best talent goes to Wall Street and AI labs, but some of them should come to companies like yourself, also to some of the energy, oil and gas even, because that's going to be hard and parcel. These are the people who will help us that clean energy transition.
I think so. I think my view on this is twofold. That energy's going nowhere. We need energy. We will always need energy, right? So it's one of the potentially the safer industries from our wonderful AI robotic future, where we're still going to need people behind the scene, I think. And so I think there is, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of efficiencies, don't get me wrong, but I see that as a big future. The climate challenge we have is absolutely real. Don't let any of the hype on the TV that this is just made up, and Joe Rogan pulling out 400 million temperature scales and somehow saying that shows there's no global warming in this process. And so it's going to need clever people to look for some of those breakthroughs, or just to realize the current technology that we've got. And if everyone runs off to Wall Street or Silicon Valley, we're not necessarily going to achieve that. So we need that. And I think that the future for me, if we continue down this line, is going to be a world dominated by which countries, which companies have the best access to reliable, cheap energy, as well as the technology and the manufacturing. And that, to me, is the ultimate equation for the future. And so one of those three things is energy. And I wouldn't just dissuade anyone, from getting involved in the energy industry.
Mm-hmm. So one final question is, we have people in the audience who will be starting their MBA or executive MBA in a few months. What advice do you have for them in terms of the kind of experience and learning that they'll get?
Yeah, I mean, you've probably heard this from other people. So I'm probably saying similar things that other people have said, but look, it is a wonderful experience. One of the things that I think I got out of the process, which I didn't mention, is just the fact that you've only got one life. So actually spending 2 years doing something as amazing as being in Cambridge, doing this crazy MBA, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Only a small number of people get to do that, or want to do it, or want to challenge themselves to do it. And I think that in itself is an amazing thing. So never lose sight of that when you're doing it. It's because you'll start and you'll be graduating before you know it. It's absolutely crazy. Everyone says that. It's true. Sometimes you're working really, really hard and you're like, why am I even doing this? But that comes and goes within a week or two, and you're back to normality and you're proud of what you've just submitted, and so on and so forth. So I think it's be proud and just really take every moment that you can. Part of that, though, is friendships and relationships with staff members and your cohort. You're going to meet people. If you're in one sector, as most of you will be, you kind of stay within that sector. Yeah, sure, you'll have friends outside, but you're not talking business with them. You're not collectively working on how do you solve problems with people from different industries. You're only really going to get to do that in scale in an environment like that. Take that opportunity to learn from other people and to make them friends, so that you're speaking with them for years and years to come, and you'll help each other out with your career and ideas as well. So that's ultimately important. And then I think the other thing is have some kind of a North Star. You've all come into this with some desire of what you want, what you hope the EMBA is going to achieve. That might actually change. I think it did for a lot of people on my course, maybe me to some extent as well. There's quite a lot of entrepreneurial component to it, which I think a lot of people, like myself, been working in big companies all their lives, and then you get exposed to all these concepts of entrepreneuriality and the startup kind of ethos that we've got going here in Cambridge, and that's changed people's minds. And there's quite a few people on the cohort that have started businesses. I didn't start one, but I tried to start one with a couple of colleagues. We didn't quite get it off the ground, but that's fine. But others of my colleagues actually did, and they've got ventures going now. And so I think that exposure, open yourself to exposure, open yourself to be influenced, to think, I've got a North Star. I think I know what I want to get out of this course. And I think I want to know which direction my career is going to go in. But just be open in this next couple of years to thinking, is that still true for me? And I think that'll serve you well.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for those wonderful words of advice and for sharing your thoughts about clean energy transition and your career as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you for your questions and for watching.